Morning, everybody. Before we start, welcome to this hybrid meeting of the Integrated Joint Board Audit Committee. I would remind all attendees that this meeting is being recorded and webcast live on the Council's YouTube channel. I have agreed the attendance of some members remotely and would remind all remote attendees to mute their microphones when not speaking. For any members of the public watching, please note that all the public committee reports, including details of specific recommendations, are available on the Council's website. Okay, item 1, Liz, apologies. Sorry.
There was somebody waiting in the lobby a second ago.
Oh. Somebody waiting? Hi, Chris. Good morning.
Thank you, Convener. We have apologies from Hayley Mearns and Christopher Schofield.
Thank you. Item 2. Has anybody got any declarations of interest and statements of transparency in accordance with the Code of Conduct of members of public bodies? I don't see any. No. Thank you. So item number 3, which is minutes including action points 3A on page 4. It's the two sets of minutes, one for this committee on the 28th of August and then another set of minutes for the 30th of October. I hope you've all read these, and has anybody got any issues or questions with them? Or if not, can we approve those? Yes, thank you. Item 3B, which is the action points on page 11. If we could ask Sandy to talk us through that.
Yep, thanks, Chair. So you'll see the top 3 items are green, one of them relatively recent, but another couple from June and April. Hopefully the comments on that paper are clear enough for everybody. There's an item from a year ago under the corporate governance update. There's an issue about the scheme of delegation at the time. It's something that we still haven't been able to solve. It's actually referred to in a paper much later on today's agenda. One of the problems, I don't think I go into this in the attached paper, is that we have been focusing on a lot of work regarding the operational scheme of delegation, particularly for social care, which Kirsty may be familiar with, for our social care delivery inside Angus Council, for the Health and Social Care Partnership, and we have been focusing on that. It's been a bit more complicated than we thought. Maybe the presentation has changed slightly, and the contents needed a lot of updating. So once we've got that out of the way, we will move on to deal with the IJB scheme of delegation itself. Now, there is one in place, but it's old now and does need updating. So we'll get to that, I hope, in early 2025. And the item from April 2023, these things overlap because that kind of appears in our internal audit follow-up points and in some of our governance actions. It's basically about the governance framework we have for lead partner services. I've said we're nearing completion. We are nearing completion. We've got loose ends. We've got 5 domains that we're working on in terms of the governance for lead partner services: finance, risk, clinical care, professional governance, strategy and performance activity. And we're gradually getting them into place. And only last week, Abigail here, who's here to speak about risk, but there was a paper that went to a regional group looking at risk management and risk sharing and clinical governance issue sharing across all partnerships. So things are gradually falling into place, but we're not quite there yet, and we've still got a wee bit more to do, and that's why it's still red, yeah.
Thank you, Sandy. So with that explanation from Sandy, has anybody got any questions about the action points? Are you happy to move on with them? Kirsty, yes?
Thank you. It's just a very practical question, Sandy, about the operational scheme of delegation and the timescale. Do you have an anticipated timescale for that work to be kind of completed, and who's leading it from the partnership, just so we can link in from a children's perspective?
Yeah, actually, John Cooper is definitely leading on that piece of work. In terms of timescales, I mean, I've got the impression he's getting towards the end of it because it was on an agenda, but he couldn't make a meeting last week. I'm not sure exactly how close we are to the end of that, Kirsty. I will find out from John. I'll get John to make contact with you about that. Okay?
Okay, thank you. Any other points? No, happy to accept those action points and the progress made to date. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item number 4, which is the Audit Committee working arrangements. It's a report by Chief Finance Officer, a number of recommendations. So I'll just pass it straight over to Sandy to give us a rundown on that.
Yep, thanks, Chair. This covers a few different types of issues in here. We talk about membership of the committee, or in particular the Chair and Vice Chair roles, constitutional arrangements and the IJB development session. I'm going to sweep up one or two other things. Although we have apologies from Chris Schofield, this would have been Chris's first IJB Audit Committee meeting today. We do still have one vacancy on the Audit Committee, and that's we need a replacement for George Meakin, who stepped down probably after our October meeting. George is on the committee from the IJB as a Angus Council voting member, like Sam is an NHS Tayside voting member. But we haven't had all our Angus Council voting membership places taken on the IJB itself, and we won't have that in place until this afternoon's IJB meeting. And once that's in place, we will then seek to fill that final place on the Audit Committee. So then, in terms of the body of this report, we're updating. We always say we will review the role of Chair and Vice Chair every year. I've had a chance to, before today, this meeting, I've had a chance to speak to Andrew and Chris, who are respectively filling the Chair and Vice Chair role, and both have agreed that they are prepared to continue in these roles at the moment. I don't know if either of you want to comment on that.
Chris, I'll let you go first if you've got anything to say about
just to confirm, I've got no objections to continuing the role of Vice Chair for the period stated in Sandy's report, Andrew.
Okay, thank you. And from my point of view, I've been doing this role for a couple of years now. I've been in the Audit Committee for several years. I've said to Sandy I'm happy enough to do the chair for another year, at which point of time I'll be looking to try and get somebody else to take over from me. Not from any point of view of not liking the job. I found it very interesting, but I think in the interests of the integrity and the kind of composition and the moving forward, I think it's essential that we sort of move people around in a role like this. It's not good to have the same person settling in comfortably into the role, because then there's a tendency to maybe, I'll not say any more other than that it'd be a good idea to refresh that role. But so just giving you advance warning, you start thinking about these things. I've got a year. Thank you. Is there anything else about Sandy?
Okay, thanks, Chair, for sharing that. And obviously, we're hoping that people will stay on the Audit Committee rather than be fearful about eventually having to step into the chair role. The chair role is, I mean, we try and support the chair as much as we possibly can and make it as straightforward as we can. Just picking up on one or two other things from this paper, page 13 of the PDF file, section 3.2 of the report, talks about constitutional arrangements. Just to remind everybody, we normally discuss this at our annual development session, just to give it a bit of an airing. We haven't had that yet, it's in February, but I was keen to just document where we are in terms of updates. We've already agreed 2 updates, which are under bullet points 1 and 2 in this paper. They've already been agreed. They just haven't been formally built into the constitutional arrangements because the IJB itself has to sign them off. We're already doing that work, so we're just going to wait for the IJB to catch up with that. And then there's another one about assuming responsibility for reviewing and advising the financial regulations and reserves. Again, we're already doing that, and we're just kind of suggesting that we build it into our formal recommendations to the IJB whenever the IJB look at that, which will be some point later on in the year. And my final point is about the development session again itself, section 3.3. We hold that once a year. We've done various things. I know, Sam, you won't have been to one, but Kirsty, you probably went to last year's one, and Andrew will have been to a few, Christian will have been to a few as well. We've touched on various things over the years. Some of them have been kind of refresher type items on the agenda. And then other ones have been new things as they've been coming up, often from our internal auditors. When we introduced the internal control evaluation statement, we had an item about that a year or so ago. Abigail has dealt with some things in terms of risk management, and Judith has also supported, I think, things like that in the past. So if anybody has any things they want to flag up for potentially going on the agenda for the development session right now, or at any point over the next 3 or 4 weeks, please let us know. We'll then obviously kind of liaise with potential presenters or whatever, and just try and create an agenda. It's not a long development session. We often maybe just spend an hour and a half or looking at whatever, and we're trying to say partly it's about refreshing and keeping people up to date, and partly it's about just introducing new things as and when they require to be talked about, or if things are just emerging in our business. So please do get back to me, and I might send out a reminder email over the next few weeks as well. But Chair, that's all I want to flag up on this paper. Thanks.
Thank you, Sandy. I'll just open it out to questions then. You all had a good read of the standing orders. You can recite them backwards now. Okay, well, in that case, I'll just move straight on to the recommendations, of which there are 4. And I'll maybe précis some of them, just in the interests of voice preservation. So, first one is to reappoint myself as the role of chair. The second one is to reappoint Chris Boyle in vice chair of this committee. The third one is to consider the constitution and make any recommendations, and also include support the inclusion of the changes that have been made, and also to note the fact, as Sandy's mentioned, that the development session will be held on the 26th of February at 11 o'clock, which has been postponed from this year because of various other competing priorities. So is everybody happy with those recommendations? Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 5. That is the internal audit report, follow-up actions, a standard report that we get with most meetings. So again, I'll pass that over to Sandy, who does the bulk of the preparation of that report.
Yep, thanks, Chair. And we do this in conjunction with the IJB's management team, and Mark from the finance team here, who's here today, has also helped compile this report. We last reported this report to the October meeting, and there hasn't been a lot of time since that, from the end of October when we last met as an audit committee to when this report was largely compiled, which was the start of December. We probably only had about 5 weeks of time to see things moving on. So there hasn't been a lot of movement. However, I'll just highlight a few things. In section 3.2, just above section 3.2, at the end of 3.1, we note that we have changed some of the formatting of the spreadsheets or the database at the end of the file. We hope have done that with a view to slightly condensing the width of the file to make it a bit more accessible, and hopefully that is the case. We've also adjusted the colour key slightly on the left-hand side, so you can see the priority associated with some of the recommendations, whether they're significant or more meriting attention. Equally, on the top right of the appendix, we've now got a tracker that shows us how many outstanding actions we have and the status of those outstanding actions. Again, from the body of the report at section 3.2, we note that we have closed out a number of actions, which is helpful, 5 of them, in terms of the internal follow-up. And we are now following the new internal audit follow-up process that we shared at the audit committee in October. That in particular required us to get approval from our executive management team in terms of them supporting the closing out of all these actions and understanding the implications of that. And they have given us that for these 5 actions, which is helpful. But otherwise, I'm happy to take any kind of questions on the report. I'm just going to highlight 2 quick things in terms of the appendices. On Appendix 1, page 19 of the PDF version, The second action on that is reference AN0620 data quality, and it was about some of our work on our home care monitoring arrangements. It's been around a long time, originally due for conclusion in March 2021. We're still not there, and we have been sidetracked, I think, by looking for electronic solutions that we haven't really managed to get. I'm just flagging that point up because we haven't got to the bottom of that, and not quite. We probably need a bit more support with that because it ties in with something I'm going to say later on in the meeting today. Okay, just please bear that one in mind. And the only other thing to note is we are aware there's some spelling mistakes. I think they're more typo mistakes rather than spelling mistakes on page 22, which we will correct in due course. I think we're obviously putting these things together quite quickly and bringing data sets from other places. And I think when we've just done that final adjustment, we haven't done our checks on that, so we will correct that for the next version. But as I say, I'm happy to take any questions on all of these, and I'm pleased in terms of the management being able to sign off a few as being completed, because it just contracts the list overall.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Sandy. Yeah, and I do appreciate the reformatting of the spreadsheet. It's a lot easier to read compared to what it was at the very beginning. Believe me, it is vastly improved, and it's nice to see a lot of blue things appearing there. Take your point about the ongoing one, the second one on the list there that you mentioned. Well, I'll just like to throw over to the members of the committee. I'll ask anybody if anybody's got any questions about those specific items on the report or the report itself. And anybody in the room, first of all? I don't see anybody. Anybody on remotely? No. Okay, doke. Yeah, it's we're making progress. That's good. It is good. So there's only one recommendation. I'll move straight on to that, which is that you should note the report and the progress made to date in terms of delivering the planned responses. Are we happy with that? Thank you very much. Item number 6. Let me just find it. Was it? Item number 6. It's a report by the Chief Internal Auditor on the internal 24-25 internal audit plan progress report. So is it Jocelyn speak to that, or okay, can I hand over to you, Jocelyn, please? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So as you said, the report sets out progress with the Angus IJB internal audit plan for 24-25 and also the relevant partner organisation internal audits. The detailed progress is at Appendix 1, and if I may, I'll come back to that and I'll deal with the reports from partners first. So in terms of those relevant reports, we have 3 final NHS Tayside reports. The first of those was the annual report for 23-24. Now, this one was issued in June and considered by the NHS Tayside Audit and Risk Committee. Excuse me. It was then finalised for reporting to the September Audit and Risk Committee following agreement of the management responses. So it does seem like quite some time ago. The report provided reasonable assurance and concluded that the board had adequate and effective internal controls in place. So just to say that at the moment, the team's finalising work on the next report in that cycle, which is the NHS Tayside Internal Control Evaluation Report, and that will provide an update on progress with all of those agreed actions from the annual report, and you'll see that coming through in due course after it's been considered by the NHS Tayside Audit and Risk Committee in January. So it's really that kind of constant cycle of assurance that you'll see coming through. The summary does highlight the areas that are of particular relevance for the IJB, and there's a link there to the full report, so you can read the full thing. Also summarised under NHS Tayside reporting with links to the full reports are reviews of compliance with laws and regulations. That audit provided limited assurance, and it went to the audit committee in full. There's a robust action plan in place to address those control weaknesses. And there's also a summary of financial sustainability, which was a review of the Scottish Government self-assessment, and we provided reasonable assurance on that review. So we have 4 final Angus Council reports, the first of which is Adults with Incapacity Follow-up, which provided substantial assurance. And we also have 3 continuous auditing reports on payroll, creditors' duplicate payments, and creditors' same-person registration and authorisation. And those audits all provide either comprehensive or substantial assurance. So a fairly positive outcome from those ones. Moving back to the Appendix 1, the progress report itself, I just wanted to highlight that work on the internal control evaluation for the IJB will start at the end of January, beginning of February. So that's really the next big piece of work on our radar. But I think at this point, I'd like to bring Sandy in. We've been having some discussion on the lead partner audit that's in the plan at the moment. So if I could just hand over to Sandy to give you an update on where those discussions are. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jocelyn. Yeah, so this is a wee bit complicated, but not really. So we signed off an internal audit plan in August, 4 or 5 months ago, and that included a plan to review our lead partner arrangements, the governance associated with those. Now, we've referenced them already today. They were in the action points, and I mentioned we were getting somewhere, but not quite there, not quite over the line. And they're actually still captured in the internal audit follow-up and the governance actions in the last report. We've got 14 days set aside for this. And before we actually did that recommendation in August, Jocelyn and I had talked about that, but we went with it as it felt like the best thing to do at the time. But now, in December, we know, A, we haven't started the planning for that audit, and that's okay because we always plan to do it towards the end of the year. But as an IJB, we know we've still got loose ends, and we know roughly what those loose ends are, because I know they're around performance and activity. We've dealt with some things to do with risk and CCBG. We've still got more to do on the strategy and things like that. So we roughly know where we've still got to go, and we've still got some live internal audit recommendations that we have to close out. So that made me, and I shared that thought with Jocelyn, wonder whether we really need to have this as a priority at 14 days in our plan. So that's one thought. However, the reason for me flagging up the item in the last report where I was talking about the data quality audit from 2020 is because it feels to me as an IJB we haven't been able to solve that issue. It was meant to be solved by originally March 2021. We're now saying March 25, and I don't know what we're going to have in March 25, but it would be great if we had a solution, but I'm not quite sure how we're going to get there. That's 4 years kind of late. So that's worth thinking about. I also know that we had a very helpful internal audit, kind of like an advisory audit, regarding our charging for services that has run, was a difficult issue, and a number of you will recall that we had an internal audit that came out, I think it was in 2022, but has really helped us plot our way through that right to now, and it's still been proving to be a really helpful piece of audit work. And the thing I wondered to Jocelyn was, would it be worthwhile reattributing some of the work, the days from our lead partner service audit, maybe all of them, but maybe some of them, most of them, not 100% sure yet, to swap them over in the plan to support an advisory audit that would help us deal with that second bullet point about home care monitoring that I flagged up a few minutes ago, where we could probably do with some independent advice to help plot our way through that over the next few months and maybe the rest of the year. And I was wondering at that out loud, or not out loud, in an email to Jocelyn, and I think we both felt there was mileage in that, because if I'd known what I suppose maybe if we'd known what we know now, how we're getting on and what the relative risks are back in August, we'd have probably proposed something different to all of you in terms of a plan. But we did what we thought was the right thing at the time. And if people can understand that slightly complicated set of, this leads to that and that bit of thinking, I think my suggestion, I think Jocelyn, you are supportive of this, is while we can't give you a firm recommendation to change the plan right now, because we're not sure what this alternative plan exactly would look like, we're going to suggest to you as an audit committee generally, if you could devolve authority to Andrew as the chair, and myself as the Chief Finance Officer, Jill here as our Chief Officer, and Jocelyn as our Chief Internal Auditor, to take that idea I've just described, and if it feels like we can make that something workable over the next few working weeks, we then go with that alternative plan, because it will probably be more productive for us. Can I check, Jocelyn, I've not misspoken on your part? Does that all feel what we've spoken about?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct, Sandy. And I mean, just to say that, you know, it's perfectly normal to flex the plan throughout the year, because we want to make sure that the audits are adding value, and that we're covering the highest areas of risk. So yeah, just to confirm that I would be supportive of that change.
Thanks, Jocelyn. So I think the proposal I've just described, verbally to you, it's something that's really emerged even since we wrote these papers, over the last 3 weeks as these papers have been firmed up, but we couldn't be specific about it. And so our verbal suggestion, and hopefully if people are supportive of that, Liz will be able to capture what I set out there. If people felt they were comfortable for that, I would like to see if we're happy to support that.
I've got 2 questions before I throw it open for discussion or approval. Firstly, well, actually, yeah, 2 questions is 3 questions actually. 3 questions. Firstly, we don't know obviously the number of how this plan's going to plan out, but of the 14 days, have you got a feel for how much we're going to need for doing this internal advisory audit work rather than the ongoing lead partner audits? Is it half, or have you got a feel for it?
Not yet, because we're still at the exploratory stage, but I would think if we go down this route, it would probably need most of those 14 days. Not necessarily all of them, but most of them. But I don't know that completely yet. I mean, I would think probably at least 10. And it might, that's one of the things where we can't give you a definitive position, and we just want to be able to work this through and work it out. And a worst case scenario would be this would move the lead partner audit back a year. That would be a worst case scenario. It is a joint audit with Dundee, so there were 28 days in the plan between us and Dundee, 14 from each, and we might still be able to do the vast majority of that audit with a smaller set of days. So it's not 100% clear. We haven't got a definitive position. We would firm that up before we finalised anything. Okay, thank you. Second question: if we devolve this work to this small working group consisting of myself, yourself, Jocelyn, and Chief Officer, how are we going to let the committee know that we've got somewhere, and are we going to ask for a kind of a special meeting to vote on that? Okay, I'll deal with the second part of that. No, I'm not planning to do an extra meeting. So if you're happy to devolve the authority to change the plan to that group that I described, we'll just get on and do that if we can agree that plan amongst the 4 of us. If we can't, we don't change it, we've got a default plan. That's fine. But if the 4 of us can agree something better, we'd move to it. In terms of sharing that, what we would probably do is we'd probably take an extract of the original plan from August, say that's what it looked like in August, and this is what it now looks like at the end of January. You'll spot the difference, and you can and you to expect that. So that's how we would share it if we can reach a better and improved plan. That's fine, thanks. And just one final question, which is just to do with protocol and procedure, is do we have to change the recommendation in any way and reword it? Because if we're only asked to note this, we've got to note it with some provisos, or do we just note it? We need to include this working committee in the wordage somewhere. Yep. I'm happy to take advice from the legal advisors on this. I didn't actually read out a sentence, well, I did read out a sentence that you've set out my thinking 2 or 3 minutes ago. Hopefully that was clear, to devolve authority to that group to adjust the plan in line with what I was suggesting. And obviously we'd feedback any changes. So hopefully that could be captured, but we would have to build that in as a recommendation. Right. With that, now throw it to the floor now. Has anybody got any questions or discussions or points they want to make?
No, as a newbie and looking back, if there's a way of solving it or getting getting to a solution, then that has to be the right thing to do, because it seems a long time, doesn't it, just to have it left open.
Sam, you're talking about the long-standing issue. Yes. So I suppose there's two things. Why has that one been around a long time? And then will an internal audit help with it? And the issue that originally emerged, and it must have emerged during 2020-21, which was a period of time when we were really struggling, obviously, because of COVID and things like that, in terms of capacity to resolve entrenched issues. And it probably would have taken us a long time to mobilise a solution around something quite complicated, I'd say quite entrenched. On top of that, I know for a good period of time thought we were looking for some kind of electronic system-based solution, and that has also proved quite hard to fall into place. So those are reasons why we got to where we were. And then we kind of need a way out of that. And I think that's where we as a management team know that there are various compromises in there, things that become more time consuming, and is that the right thing to have everything perfect, or does that consume too much administrative resource, and we need to get things proportionate and things like that. I think that's the kind of thing where if we can bring in the likes of internal auditors in an advisory role, they obviously, with that kind of their professional expertise, will be able to help us see what we're trying to look at. They'll just give us a bit of extra capacity, but also using their kind of governance and advisory roles, they will be well placed to help us with that. And I'm using the experience we had with this charging audit, that some of you will remember, that the advisory role on that was really helpful. So with that in mind, and also then reflecting on the internal audit, I say, if what I felt and thought now I'd known back in August, I would have probably put a different proposition to the audit committee as a plan for August. So I think it's as Jocelyn said, you can't have a plan if you're not really prepared to change it. Well, you can, but plans are you're allowed to change a plan. We've obviously got to deal with the governance here and make sure it feels like the right thing. And I think that's what we're both thinking. And I've spoken to Jill about it. I think Jill's comfortable as well. And that's why we're bringing that forward. Thanks.
Anybody else? Kirsty?
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. And Jocelyn, I welcome the flexibility. I think it's really healthy to have that. It was just, Sandy, in terms of the lead partner governance and assurance audit, is there any additional risk that comes with pushing the timescale on that? So I see the key areas that we'd be looking at would be around information sharing, financial outlook, etc. And if we're looking to extend the scope, is there anything that we should be aware of in terms of additional risk?
Yeah, thanks, Kirsty. So we already have this risk kind of documented already. It's already in our action points. It's already in the internal audit follow-up. The very first action from 2020 is about lead partner services. On page 22 of our PDF report, the very first one in there is about hosted service arrangements, including risk management performance. So they're already documented. So I don't think we're bringing any extra risk into the system by not doing this, because we're already working on them. Not succeeding, but we're already working on them. The one thing an internal audit report on this issue would have said out loud is, sorry, Jocelyn, this is really not my business to say what I think an internal audit report would say, but it would probably have said, we've told you about this in 2020, and we've told you about it in 2021, and you've known about it for a long time. And while the landscape has changed and they might have some other things, the fundamentals are you had a problem that you've been looking to work, and you'd have probably at least made some kind of comment on it's taking you a long time to get there. There may have been other things, I don't know. So there would have been some things that would have definitely come out of the report, but I think if we can get some of the things that we're planning to do into place, Abigail was, I said a few minutes ago, we got some agreements regarding risk management and clinical governance information sharing signed off only last Friday, in fact it was, on Friday morning. If we allow them to run, the internal audit, if we did it in 6 months' time, or even at some point in the future, would be able to assess, are they now working? Whereas right now, if they tried to do that audit, all they'd do is they'd get a copy of what we discussed and agreed on Friday, which is really a plan. So I think if we did give it a bit more time, whether it's at the very end of this financial year or a smaller number of days, we'll be able to still get value out of that. But I don't think we're losing an enormous amount by downsizing that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the questions. Jocelyn, I'm assuming you're agreeing with all this, and is there anything you want to add particularly to what Sandy said or what's been asked? Or you
No,
don't have to say anything.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything I'd want to add, but just to say that I do concur. And I mean, I think it's all about, there's no point telling you things you already know. So we need to come in whenever the value's there. We've got limited days and we need to use them as wisely as possible. So as I said, I would completely support that we take this forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In that case, if there's no further questions, no, I don't see anybody. Right, so if we go on to the recommendations, we've got a bit of work to do here. Let's get there. Okay. As it stands, the recommendation just asks us to note the work undertaken, but we're now wanting to put some extra words in there. So, can I have a bash at doing the words, or have you got something for us? Or do you want me to say it and then you can say that's the right thing to do?
Yeah, we can do
From a procedural point of view, I know what we want to do, but just to get this documented correctly. So I would suggest that we put the Audit Committee is asked to note the work undertaken relating to the 2024, leave that as it is, and also to devolve to the Chief Officer, I have to get their order right, the Chief Officer, the Chief Financial Officer, the Chief Internal Auditor and the Chair of the Audit Committee the task of coming up with a finalised internal audit plan and sharing it with the committee.
Yeah.
And I don't want to specify a date on that as well?
You don't need to specify.
No, with no date specified. So basically, those 4 people to come up with a finalised internal audit plan and share it with the committee.
Could you switch your mic on for a minute?
Okay, thanks, Liz. Yeah, sorry, everybody. I also will take a learning point from this if I'm ever about to make stuff up on the hoof.
Have the words ready.
So, I mean, just so everybody's clear, I mean, Joss and I, our most recent email exchange about this was probably today, but we have only spoken about it over the last probably 4 or 5 working days, and Andrew and I only had a chance to speak about it this morning. So, in terms of an additional recommendation, I'll just read stuff out. Andrew, this is from Liz, but I think it kind of confirms what you just said. Okay. We'll agree to devolve authority to the Chair of the IJB Audit Committee, the Chief Officer, the Chief Finance Officer and the Chief Internal Auditor to adjust the internal audit plan for 2024-25, particularly with regarding the 14 days set aside for the lead partner audit and with a view to developing an advisory audit regarding outstanding internal audit action follow-up points. Okay?
Yeah, that seems fine.
Okay.
Everybody happy with the words? Perfect. Thank you. With that, we will move on to item number 7, which is Risk and Resilience Mid-Year Report, page 28. And it's a report by Jill, but is it Sandy or Abby that's going to? Right. Thank you, Abby. I'll pass it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is to provide a mid-year update on the risk and resilience activity within the partnership. So please just note the typo in the first line. I apologise. So it's from April 2024 to December 2024. So just to provide a little bit of background around some of the work that we've been doing in relation to risk and resilience. The IJB risk management strategy will be updated by the Tayside Risk Management Group in this coming year, 2025. We're also going to be looking at the reporting to the IJB and to Audit Committee, because with the introduction of additional risk reporting to the IJB through the CCPG assurance report provided 3 times a year and the CCPG Chair's assurance reporting initiated in 2023, there's some overlap and duplication of reporting of strategic risks to the IJB and the Audit Committee. So we're just wanting to make sure we can streamline that and make that as efficient as possible. But we hope to link in with our colleagues in internal audit around that to make sure that we are continuing to meet both the needs of the IJB and the Audit Committee. So in the last sort of 6-month period, we have 5 risks that are red risks. The sustainability of primary care services. So this risk is currently under review by NHS Tayside. We have the financial sustainability risk, the Angus Health and Social Care Partnership sustainability of general practice services, the Eclipse system and delivery of the strategic commissioning plan. Since the last reporting period, our strategic risk regarding commission services on met need has increased from a risk score of 9 to a risk score of 16, and this was following review by IJB members. You'll note in the detail of the report around the strategic risks that some of the risks do not have a level of assurance assigned to them. So this was something we just started back in March. So the reports were reported prior to that period. So the next reporting period for each of these risks, a level of assurance will be agreed at CCPG. Just to note that at IJB on the 30th of October, the IJB's risk appetite was agreed. And just to draw your attention to some of the outstanding internal audit actions, as Sandy has said, we've made quite a bit of progress around these. And just to draw your attention to the action around the resilience framework in relation to the Civil Contingencies Act. So it was just to note progress in relation to resilience planning with the approval of the Angus Health and Social Care Partnership Resilience Framework at IJB on the 30th of October. We're hoping that this report is providing reasonable assurance to the committee, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Abby. Thanks for that overview of the report. I have a couple of questions. No, really, I've got one question before I put it out to the rest of the committee. Although you mentioned the fact that the risk management systems are reasonable, and there's general, in page, the bottom of page 34, that it's reasonable and there's controls are applied and all that sort of thing. If you look at the individual risks, a lot of them have got words like current controls. It's not possible to mitigate against the risk because of external factors. Another one says not fully operating. Controls are not fully operating effectively. So how does that square up with the reasonableness assessment if we can't mitigate risks? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. So in terms of the reasonable, we're thinking about the systems and processes that we have in place to be able to identify risks and whether there are gaps in that. Within the individual risks, so when the risks are reported through CCPG, the risk owners and managers bring a full report where they provide us assurance around the effectiveness of the controls and seek support if there's further controls that are needed to be able to help mitigate that. But as you've said, there are a number of areas where, unfortunately, not everything is within our gift to be able to do something with that. And the teams are working to try and identify as many further mitigation actions as possible to reduce the risks to within sort of a comfortable level.
Thank you. Yeah, that's fine. Thanks for clarifying that. I'll just open it for questions now, Sam.
When you talk about the sustainability of primary care being reviewed by Tayside, has that been reviewing the score or reviewing where the risk sits?
So you'll be aware that it did just to sit and was reported through Care Governance Committee. So there have been further conversations around that I'm not 100% sure just yet on where that's going. But I'm hoping Jill might be able to come in around that. But Jill, are you able to?
Yeah, thanks, Abby. Sam, just following on from some of the discussion at NHS Tayside Board, you will be aware that Nikki is very keen that we have a regional sustainability of primary care risk that also sits with NHS Tayside. That will be separate to the one that we have as a strategic risk within the partnership. So there will then be two risks. There's further discussions that are taking place on the 30th of December to try and work that through with a bit more detail, with a view to bringing it back to NHS Tayside Board in February.
Thanks, Jill. That was the case. Thanks for your help for clarifying that.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Jill. Anybody else got questions on the risk report? No. I don't see any. No, thank you. So we'll move on to the recommendations. There's 4 of them. We've asked to scrutinise and discuss the contents of the report, which we've done. Acknowledge the progress has been made in relation to resilience planning. Yes. Acknowledge the approval of Angus IJB risk appetite on the 30th of October. Remember that. So that's an update of the existing one. And consider and agree a reasonable level of assurance regarding risk management systems and processes within the partnership, as we've discussed. So we're happy with those recommendations. Yes. Thanks very much, Abby, and thanks for that report. We'll move on to item number 8, which is the directions update. Just get my page number. Okay, that's basically a directions update from the Chief Finance Officer. So I'll pass it straight over to Sandy. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So most of you will be aware that the process of issuing a direction by the IJB to NHS Tayside Angus Council is one of our processes we have in place to make sure things that we decide in the IJB do eventually happen. And what this paper here does is it takes directions we've issued from meetings and follows up to see where are they kind of falling into place. And as a audit committee, we have been tasked by the IJB to do this twice a year to follow up on directions that have been issued. This paper actually does go slightly beyond that because it also looks at the direction policy, and I'll take that separately in a few minutes. Appendix 1, the landscape table, sets out the list of currently live directions that we have within the IJB. It's not a long list, there's only 2 items on that. And both are remaining as work in progress, and both are being reported to the IJB relatively regularly in terms of primary care updates that come into the IJB. So board members have seen papers on these subjects within the last year, some as recently as October 2024. So that's relatively current information. In the body of the report, though, we do note that the IJB has not issued any new directions in the last 12 months and hasn't issued any this year. And I think that's just something that it's worth us reflecting on. I've spoken with Jill about that, and I'm not sure if that's an old hand. I mean, she's got her hand up. I'm going to probably bring Jill in on that point anyway. The issue of directions is not something that we've seen a lot coming through. It could be to do with the types of reports we're seeing. It's something that we'll come back to, and it's something that we could perhaps reflect on briefly here, and it's something that we probably do need to highlight in the next Chair's Assurance Report going to the IJB in February. So that's something that is worth us reflecting on. And before I go on to just speak about the policy itself, I'm just going to pause there to just give us time to reflect on that particular point. And Jill, do you want to come in on that particular point?
It was on that point, Sandy, if that's okay, and I think it was just to reflect some of the discussions that we've had around that, but also some discussions that I've had with Julie as current chair of the IJB and Jackie Buchanan as director of legal. and the intention to run a kind of development session specifically on the role of the IJB board members, roles and responsibilities, review what directions actually are and how, when we should be considering using directions, because we are very conscious that we haven't included any directions in any of our reports. Now, it could just be because of the type of reports that we're taking, that we have taken to the IJB recently, but in the early part of 2025, we will be doing that all-encompassing development session, and that will also include the review of our standing orders piece of work that also needs to happen. So trying to pull all of that together into a development session around the IJB, the use of directions and standing orders, and then it will link into the one that we're doing around good governance as well.
Okay, thank you, Jill. Thanks for that. You want to move on because you just touched on one point, Sandy.
Yeah, unless there's any other questions on the current directions, I will move on to the issue about the directions policy, Chair. I'll do that now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so the directions policy was agreed, I think, about, well, it says here, April 2023, so over a year ago, and it was agreed at the IJB, and the IJB retains the authority to change that, not the Audit Committee. However, we are looking at directions, we look at them today, we look at them half yearly, and I felt it was perhaps worth us just sharing some views, potentially with the Audit Committee making a recommendation to the IJB about 2 updates to the current policy. Those updates, if people are looking at a PDF version, they appear on page 48 and 49, but they're also set out in the bullet points in the middle of section, the final section of section 3 of this report. The policy doesn't currently have a review date. We're going to make a recommendation suggesting to this committee it should have a review date. It doesn't need to be frequent. We've got down here every 3 years, so regular, but every 3 years is probably okay, unless new guidance comes along that suggests we need to change it. And the other thing is that we're making a recommendation that where there is an existing, currently valid live direction, that live direction should be referred to in reports on that subject matter when they come to the IJB at some point in the following month or years or whatever, so that there's an active link back to a direction that's already out there. And we're recommending that both these 2 points are built into our revised direction policy. If this group is comfortable and supportive of that, we can make that recommendation to the IJB for them to deal with. We are also, and you'll see this from the recommendation 2, making a slightly different recommendation, and that is that rather than the IJB itself retain oversight of the directions policy, I'm going to suggest to this Audit Committee that we in turn suggest to the IJB that the review of the directions policy is devolved to the Audit Committee in future. And that would be consistent with things like the review of the themselves, but the policy and the financial regulations. And again, this would be about the policy associated with the direction, so we could refresh it ourselves in due course and as required. It wouldn't be about the issuing of directions, of course, that remains with the IJB. So those are the recommendations that are built in here. And if this group is supportive of them, we would have to take them back to the IJB because the IJB controls this at the moment. Hopefully that makes sense, but again, I'm happy to take any questions or comments on that.
Thanks, Andy. There's quite a lot in there. So people got questions on there? Yeah, it seems straightforward now. Yeah, the first point about there being no directions, so we need to look at what we do with directions. So that's being covered in this development session, which will be a useful exercise. So, the directions policy changes seems like a sensible thing to do. They're quite minor as well, and the other one to recommend to IJB that we actually take over the policy of directions, not the directions themselves, but the policy, similar to what we do with the reserves policy, seems again fairly clear. I hope that's clear to everybody. So it's reflected in the recommendations, and I won't read them out again because that's just repeating what we've said already. So is everybody happy with the recommendations? Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to item number 9. Okay, that's 2023-24 external annual audit report, progress report. Seem to have been talking about that one for quite a while now, so I'll pass that over to Sandy. I don't think there's anybody here from the external auditor. So, Sandy, if you could just tell us a bit about this report, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So much as we do for internal audit actions and governance actions, this report sets out where we are with the outstanding action points from our most recent external audit, which, as it happens, was only 2 months ago. We haven't made much progress with these. They're documented here. We had to put it down because it was on our work plan. We will close these out over the next 3 or 4 months, I'm sure, and by the time we come back in April, we will have a more closed out position. Just for people's clarity, the issue about financial sustainability is not something we are immediately going to be able to solve, but we can do, when I say close it out, we will do all we can to put stuff in front of the IJB board members to explain where we are and set out the actions we need to take. But it's not magically going to solve the financial sustainability issues, but it will move it on in terms of what we said we would do already to the IJB, do with the IJB, and already what we said to the auditors as well. So that's where we are. Thanks, Chair.
So can I understand that if we close off this item, we can close it off completely? Or do we always have to have this here if the financial sustainability isn't achieved?
So we have seen this type of action point before, but this is it. This is the audit point that came out of our 2023-24 external audit, which we only saw in October. There was a very similar action from the year before, and that's what you are absolutely recalling, and they are aimed at the same thing, but they are formally or technically they are different actions.
Right, thank you. Has anybody got any questions about that? It's a fairly uncomplicated issue. It's just solving it is a different matter, but understanding it is reasonable. So, okay. Well, I'll just move on to the recommendations then. Sorry, I'm not very skillful at this, getting the right page. Okay, it's one recommendation that the Audit Committee considers and notes the attached external audit report action plan, including that further updates will be brought forward to the Angus Integration Board meeting in April 2025, the next meeting. So happy with that recommendation. Thank you. Okay. Move on to item number 10. The agenda. Okay, again, this is the governance document report. Again, it's Sandy's put that together. So if you, it's fairly self-evident, but if you want to say a few words of what's behind this report, basically.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So I've set out in the background that following previous internal audit recommendation, we would try and set out annually where all our governance documentation is, so the whole set of documents to support the governance of the IJB. Largely with a view of confirming a lot of these are in the public domain. They're not quite all in the public domain, but we are gradually getting there. And to also give this committee a kind of a governance reassurance that these documents are refreshed at a certain interval. They're not all assessed, obviously, at the same interval. Put a couple of brief bullet points down on the front page, but the appendix does set out, the key, I'd say, the key governance documents, everything from the integration scheme, which is actually formally owned by NHS Tayside Angus Council, through to things that we have seen come through either this committee, things like standing orders, financial regulations, reserves policy, directions policy, and almost certainly is listed on the second page, all things we've spoken about or referenced at some point today. Risk management, risk appetite, which we've seen at a very recent IJB, equalities, which we've seen at a recent IJB. So it's setting out when we've last updated them, when we plan to update them next, and it's really there as a kind of a reference point. But from this group's point of view, it's about making sure that this list, you're cited on it, and you can see where we are with it all. And you might think, well, when's that going to get reviewed? Are we on top of that? Has it got out of date? How does it get reviewed? And the fact that you were just referenced updating the directions policy, partly fell out of writing this report because I could see when we looked at the directions policy there wasn't a refresh date, and yet we do need a refresh date or planned refresh date for most of these documents, so that's why we built that one in, and this has just given us that kind of rigour regarding that directions policy issue. Things that we haven't done include things like the scheme of delegation, and that's clearly, we've talked about it already today, but it's referenced on here as the very last item on this schedule. So I hope people find it helpful. It is kind of a, it's not something I'm hoping people are going to have to go to regularly. It's there for a purpose to allow people to see that things are being updated and we know where to turn to for public versions of these documents.
Okay, thank you very much. It's clear. It's a very useful reference document. It's different from the work plan, which the work plan is a set of meetings that we have to have throughout the year, but some of these may or may not appear at meetings, but not specified specifically in the work plan itself. But it is a very useful go-to place for all the documentation that we talk about and when it's been last updated and who maintains it. So I found it very useful. I hope you do as well. And thank you, Sandy, for keeping that up to date. Has anybody got any questions about that? No, before I move on to the recommendation, which is, I think, just to note it basically. Just check. Yeah. Consider the update and note the documentation that needs to be progressed, and note that similar annual updates will continue to be included in the Audit Committee's annual work plan. That's fine. Are we happy with that? Yep. Thank you very much. So, item number 11, that's the actual date of the next meeting, which is not until the 30th of April next year at 11:30. But reminding everybody that we have got a development session on the 26th of February, which has been put forward we should have had it in December. So, with that in mind, bearing the current season of the year, so I just wish everybody on the committee a happy holiday and break over the season, over the festive season, and see you all next year. Thank you very much for your contributions. Thanks. Bye.
John, can we stop the live stream, please?